Hi everyone, going to be doing a video series on assembling a R60/2 engine. This is a 1967 bike, but we disassembled this. I disassembled it about a month or so ago. The crankshaft was junk on it, so I've got a replacement crankshaft, and we took it to the machine shop and measured it out. Everything is in spec, really good crankshaft, so it's ready to go back together. Um, Installing all new bearings. These are the crank bearings, fag bearings, good quality bearings, um, and also putting new camshaft bearings in. I've already done that. They're also these 6203 fag bearings. So in getting everything ready to go back together, first I've got the camshaft assembled, and then we'll be getting the crankshaft and its various components ready to go back together. The camshaft has a bearing on either end, on this end and on this end. So it presses apart. You can use a press, take it apart, and then press the new bearings on and the timing gear on, and it's ready to go on. I'm not going to show that process, but um, basically get your camshaft ready with the new bearings pressed on. This camshaft's in great shape. The lobes show no wear, so it's ready to go back on. Um, to get the crankshaft ready, there's a few things I like to do. If you can see, this is the flywheel taper where the flywheel sits on the crankshaft. And what I do is I mount the crank in a vise, bench vise, and then put a little bit of valve lapping compound on this taper, and then seat the flywheel on there and turn the flywheel to mate the two surfaces. And you can kind of then get an idea if you know the surfaces are a good fit for each other. And these are, you can see there's a nice dull wear pattern all the way around, and same on the flywheel taper. So that's ready to go back together. Next thing we'll probably want to do is oil these the big ends of the connecting rods. These are the oil feed holes here that feed oil to those big rod bearings. So we'll want to get some oil in there before we assemble everything, so that on startup it's good to go. I've also put the keys back in on the front and the rear of the crankshaft. So those keys are put back in and ready to go. This is the front main bearing carrier, and what we're going to do is get it ready to buy. This is where the front main bearing goes, and it's been taken out. So we're going to install the new main bearing into there. And to do that, we're going to heat this. This is aluminum. Heat that up nice, and then this bearing should just drop right into there. So that's probably the next thing we're going to do. You can use a torch or a heat gun to get it hot. So that'll just take a few minutes of heat, and just kind of heat it evenly, and then you can drop that bearing in. Okay, so got this heated up to about 150 degrees or so Fahrenheit, and I'm going to drop in the new bearing here. And it just drops right in since that's hot. So that's good. The next thing we'll do is put the oiler plate onto the front bearing carrier, and you'll see that where the oil feed tube is, there's a small hole in the front of the carrier that lines up with. So we'll put that on there and screw it down. Okay, and that's this oil plate installed. It just uses 4 M6 bolts and washers to go on. And next thing we're going to do is install the oil pump gears into that front bearing carrier. And you'll see on the front bearing carrier there are two holes here that these gears fit through. The one that has the threads on the end goes into the top hole, and then the other one fits into the bottom hole like that. So this is what they look like, and you want to check and make sure that they turn smoothly, and you can actually check the lash between the teeth of the gears, which looks fine on these. And then you can put some assembly lube onto those gears, and we'll also oil this front main bearing. And then we can basically set the front bearing carrier aside. It's ready to go on at this point. Okay, coming back to the crankshaft, the first thing we can do on the rear of the crankshaft is to install the rear slinger. So these are original slingers. They were packed full of crud and spent a long time cleaning them. When you think you've got everything, you probably don't. Keep going until they're spotlessly clean inside. So this will go onto the rear of the crank, like that. It only fits one way, and it's held on with two slinger screws. And the originals are in good shape, so I'm actually reusing them. I'm going to put just a dab of blue Loctite onto them, and we'll thread them in. So we'll want to get these slinger screws nice and tight. And then from the factory, when they install them, they take a punch and punch just a little bit of slinger material into those screws to keep them from backing out. So we're going to do the same. You can use a punch, or you can use a flathead screwdriver like this. Works just fine. So just line it up with one of the slots in the screw. We just want to give it a couple of taps to get some of that metal pushed into there. So I just did that one there, and we'll do that screw as well. Okay, so we've got both the slinger screws installed and staked, and then taken some assembly lube and feed it into the hole that feeds the connecting rod big end there. So, and you can kind of get the oil going through there, so there'll be some oil in the big end when we assemble this. The next thing we're going to do is install the rear main bearing onto the back of the crank, and it's just a press fit. So we're going to heat the bearing, and then it should slip right onto the cold crankshaft. Okay, so I've used the heat gun to heat the rear main bearing up. Before we put it on the crankshaft, we have to remember that there's a crank spacer that goes on the rear. There's one for the front and the rear. The one on the rear is 2 millimeters. It's the thinner of the two, and it has a beveled edge. That beveled edge goes towards the crankshaft. So we're going to slip the washer onto the crank, and then we're going to put the bearing onto here. And then we can use the presser, the old crank flywheel bolt, I'm sorry, and this little spacer to press it into place. Just get it started. Go until it's all the way fully seated. So, and we'll leave that on there till that cools just a bit, and then we can take that off. But that gets the rear main bearing pressed onto the tail of the crankshaft, and it's good that it took some force to get that on, because a lot of times the rear main bearings will spin on that crank journal and ruin that crank journal. So that's a good tight press fit. I feel good about that. So yeah, it's all the way on there. So there's the rear main bearing pressed on. I actually clamped the crankshaft in a vise so I could tighten that down, make sure it was all the way seated, which it was. So that's about all we need to do for the crankshaft. I'm putting a little bit of oil in the feed hole to the front connecting rod. Put some assembly lube in there just to make sure we have that nice and oiled. And then this crankshaft is ready to go into the case. The case has been cleaned, media blasted, vapor honed, cleaned. So there's no media residue. And what we're going to do is put the case into the oven. It's best to do this when your wife isn't home. And we're going to heat that to about 250, 275 degrees, nice and hot. And then when it comes out of the oven nice and hot, we should be able to install the crankshaft, and the rear main bearing should slip right into the rear main bearing carrier of the case. So that's it for this first part of this video. I'll continue with another video where we'll install the crankshaft and the front main bearing carrier and continue with the assembly then.